There are holes in your brick wall right now. And no, not damage or cracks from settling, but actual deliberate gaps. And your first instinct is to seal them. Fill them with mortar, stuff them with mesh, or call someone to fix what looks like an oversight. But what if sealing those holes is one of the most damaging things you could do to the structure you are trying to protect? What if those gaps were not left there by accident? What if the wall that contains them is counting on them to stay open? After today, you will understand why the instinct to seal every gap in a wall is the instinct that turns a healthy structure into a sick one. And you will never look at a brick wall the same way again. Let's start with what those holes actually are. They are not mistakes. They are not the result of missing mortar or poor workmanship. They have a name. They are called weep holes, and they were placed there deliberately by the mason who built your wall as an essential part of the wall's survival system. Read that again. Survival system. Brick walls are not solid. A brick veneer wall, the kind on the exterior of most homes built in the last 70 years, is actually two walls. There is the brick face you can see, and behind it, separated by a narrow cavity, the structural wall of your home. That cavity is a gap of roughly 1 inch. It is designed to exist. And moisture from rain, from condensation, from the water that migrates through brick, because brick is porous, collects at the bottom of that cavity every single day. I remember reading the construction specification on this for the first time and having to stop. 1 inch. The thing standing between a functional wall and a rotting wall is a 1-inch gap and a row of small holes at the bottom that nobody ever thinks about. The weep holes are drains. They let that trapped water out. They also let air in, which dries the cavity from the inside. Without them, the water has nowhere to go. But drainage is only one part of what they do, and it is not the part that most homeowners need to understand most urgently. Here is what actually happens inside a sealed cavity. When weep holes are blocked, with mortar, with foam, with the fine mesh that seems like it should keep pests out, the moisture that enters through the brick face has no exit. It collects at the base of the cavity. It saturates the flashing, the thin metal layer designed to redirect water outward. It migrates into the structural wall behind the brick. It reaches the wood framing, the insulation, the sheathing. Wood that stays wet does not dry. It begins to degrade. This process happens inside your walls, behind surfaces that look completely fine from every direction you can see, for months or years before any visible sign appears. No discoloration, no smell, no indication from the exterior at all. The brick face looks exactly as it always did. The damage is occurring in the 1 inch of space between what you can see and what is holding your home together. By the time ROT or mold becomes visible, through a baseboard, through a window frame, through a soft spot in an interior wall, the cavity behind it has already been compromised for a long time. Weep holes, when open, interrupt this process at the source. Water drains, air circulates, the cavity dries, the system works exactly as it was designed to. And if you've stayed this long, there are 100 more things in your home worth understanding before you touch them. So, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Now let's talk about the specific threats those holes are actually keeping out of your wall, because this is the part that changes how you think about every gap you have ever considered filling. Here is where it becomes deeply personal. A sealed weep hole does not just trap moisture, it creates pressure. Specifically, it creates positive air pressure inside the cavity when temperatures shift, with warm air expanding and cold air contracting, and that pressure pushes outward through whatever path it can find, into window frames, along mortar joints, behind siding transitions. It creates the microgaps that insects use as entry points far more effectively than any open weep hole ever would. An open weep hole, properly sized, does not invite pests in. It equalizes the pressure that would otherwise force them in somewhere worse. The insects that actually colonize wall cavities, carpenter ants, certain termite species, moisture-seeking beetles, are not entering through weep holes. They are entering through areas of sustained moisture and wood decay. The weep hole is not the vulnerability. The sealed, wet cavity is the vulnerability. The hole that looks like an opening is, in biological terms, the thing that removes the conditions those insects require. A pest control technician cannot treat what is happening inside a sealed, saturated wall cavity. The weep hole that looks like an entry point is often the only thing preventing the interior environment that would make that treatment necessary in the first place. But there is one more dimension to what weep holes do, and it is the part of this story that most people never hear. Research published by the Building Science Corporation, drawing on thermal and moisture analysis across hundreds of wall assemblies, identified a consistent pattern in failed brick veneer systems across North America. In the vast majority of documented moisture failures in cavity walls, weep holes had either been sealed intentionally by homeowners, filled during renovation work, or blocked by accumulated mortar droppings during original construction. The finding that researchers returned to repeatedly was this: the walls that failed were not the ones with open holes, they were the ones without them. Let that settle for a moment. The gap that looks like a flaw is the feature. Every wall that failed had somewhere in its history someone who looked at a small hole and decided it should not be there. Someone who reached for mortar or foam or mesh and closed the thing that was keeping the structure intact. The instinct to seal is so strong, so universal, and so consistently wrong in this particular case that building scientists now treat blocked weep holes as one of the primary diagnostic indicators when investigating moisture damage claims. Your wall was designed with those holes. It was not designed to function without them. And there is something even more specific that deserves your attention, something about what those holes are doing that has nothing to do with water at all. The cavity behind your brick is a thermal buffer. In a functioning wall system, the air moving through the weep holes and up through the cavity carries heat away from the structural wall in summer and moderates condensation in winter. This is not a side effect. It is one of the engineering reasons the cavity wall system was developed in Britain in the 19th century, originally not for moisture control, but to reduce heat transmission into the interior of stone and brick structures. The cavity wall principle spread across construction in the United Kingdom and then North America precisely because of what moving air inside a wall could do for the stability of the interior environment. Engineers working on modern building envelope systems still model weep hole placement and sizing to optimize airflow through the cavity, calculating how much ventilation a given wall section requires based on orientation, climate, and wall height. The small gap in your brick is part of a system that has been continuously refined for over 150 years. It connects your home to a lineage of building knowledge that predates modern materials science by several generations. The builders who placed those holes knew what they were doing. They were not leaving something unfinished. So what should you actually do about the weep holes in your brick wall? The answer depends on one thing. Are they open or blocked? Open weep holes, leave them completely alone. Check periodically that debris, soil, or landscaping mulch has not crept up and covered them. They do not need to be large. They do not need a cover. They need to be clear. Blocked. Weep holes, this is where it is worth the attention. If you can see that mortar, foam, or accumulated debris has filled the openings, those can be cleared with a thin tool, carefully without disturbing the surrounding masonry. If the blockage is not accessible from the outside, a mason can assess whether reopening them is possible. This is not a cosmetic task. It is maintenance. What you should never do is seal them permanently. Not because something will come through the hole, nothing is waiting there to enter, but because the moment you close the exit, you are closing the system. The water that was leaving every time it rained now stays. And it has somewhere to go into the structure you were trying to protect. A weep hole is not a flaw. It is not unfinished work. It is not an entry point or a sign that something was built wrong. It is a drain, a vent, a pressure valve, and a thermal component, all in an opening smaller than your thumb, engineered into the wall to keep the cavity dry, the air moving, and the structure stable for the life of the building. That small gap in your brick is not something to seal. That is something to protect. Have you ever filled a weep hole in your wall or found one that had been sealed when you moved into your home? Tell me what you found in the comments. I read every single one.